So my name is Marc Boxser. I'm the Group Director for External Relations and Strategic Initiatives from GEMS Education. And I'm here because of the strategic initiatives part of that very long title, because we signed a partnership earlier this month with edX, which is a pioneering online learning platform. And so Anant is my partner in crime. So really, this is a Meet the Mentor session. It's meant to be informal. So I'm going to ask Anant some questions, but I would ask any of you, if you want to follow up or jump in, just put up your hand. This doesn't have to be sort of 10 boring questions from me and then 10 interesting questions from you. So can I just ask a question of anyone who's listening? How many people have heard of edX and know what it is? All right, so about 50%. So we'll spend some time on edX, but we don't have to explain the whole thing. I'm also curious, just to get a quick straw poll, how many people think education can be done purely online? Okay, so one person. All right, that's good. I just wanted to set those parameters. So I'm going to ask Anant firstly, we've heard a lot about online education, MOOCs, things like that at this conference. I'd like to just ask Anant to put that on the side when he introduces himself and talk a bit about his story and how he came as, someone from India to now be an entrepreneur and professor at MIT and that journey. So if you could just give us the sort of, Wikipedia page plus introduction.
Sure. So I grew up in India. Can people hear me in the back over there? Can people hear me? A little louder? Okay, or maybe I'll bring it closer. Oh, okay, much better. So I grew up in Mangalore in India. Went to school there, and the curriculum there was what is called SSLC, Secondary School Leaving Certificate. It was a pretty watered down curriculum. It wasn't as good as IB or IISC or any of those, or CBSE and so on. I got into IIT, did my 5 years of engineering there, went to Stanford, got my PhD, and then became a professor at MIT, where I've been teaching for 26 years. And then in the last couple of years, I founded edX, which was funded by Harvard and MIT. edX is an online learning destination where you can take free courses from great universities like MIT and Harvard, or Berkeley, or Tsinghua University, and so on. And these courses are free. Oh, I forgot to mention. edX is also a nonprofit. In terms of my own journey, I've done a number of startup companies. I'm a serial entrepreneur.
What were those startup companies? What were they in? What industry?
Sure. So one startup company was called Virtual Machine Works. I built a hardware system for testing chips. My most recent startup that's still around, it's called Tylera Corporation. It's California-based. And Tylera built a multi-core chip, a processor chip. It's a kind of processor that is used in things like network routers and embedded systems. So that company is about 8 years old, and I serve on the board of that company. edX is my first nonprofit, and since the only way I know how to run companies is as highly innovative startup companies, even though edX is a nonprofit, we run it very much like a startup company in terms of innovation and sense of urgency and so on. So when you hear things like big nonprofits and public sector companies don't move fast or slow and boring and so on, shed all that view. edX is very much like a cutting-edge startup company.
Thank you. So I have one immediate question, because I know some people in the room, and we've got some tech people, and we've got some teachers. So, what's your experience or advice for professors and then for entrepreneurs, since you wear both hats?
So my advice for professors is that I think I'm a professor, so I can certainly crack professor jokes, is that what's funny about us professors is that we do research on cutting-edge stuff, but as professors, we are oftentimes the slowest to adopt new technologies ourselves. And so one piece of advice I would give is that with online learning, Many of us have notes that have been written for, over a long period of time, but really to think innovation, think of ways of adopting new technologies because our children want to, our students want to. I think our students, the millennial generation, are completely different from our own generation. They're very comfortable getting information electronically, and so at MIT, for example, in most classes, you'll be lucky if towards the end of the semester, 20 or 30% of the students are still showing up to lecture. They are speaking with their feet. It's time we listen to them. To entrepreneurs and innovators, I always, I'm asked this question a lot. There's just one little piece of advice, which is never give up. If you're doing something really innovative, then it's not been done before, and it's going to be really hard. And so you're likely to fail very often, because if you succeeded easily, that means you either did not reach out far enough, or nobody cares about it because it's already been done. So with a very high likelihood, you're going to fail very often. And so, so the trick there is that you have to try to succeed and by just not giving up.
So I would say the last 2 years has been, the time of the MOOCs, this buzzword, and we've seen a lot of new entities, new companies, and new organizations like edX, Udacity, Coursera. So for you, what is the blue sky biggest opportunity from this phenomenon? What could, they talk about it as disruptive, so what does disruption look like 5 years from now or 20 years from now? What's the biggest opportunity we could get out of this?
I think there's two major opportunities. One is, how many of you were at the first session yesterday, in which which had Salil Shetty from Amnesty International and the others? So how many of you were at that session? So Salil said that education is a basic human right. And I certainly believe that, and I believe that every person should have access to an education, much like the air we breathe. And so I think our biggest opportunity with online learning is that we have been able to drive the incremental cost of educating somebody completely online down to near zero. So once we create all the material and the content, it's like Google search or like Facebook. When one new user comes into Facebook, the incremental cost of supporting that user from 1 billion to 1 billion and one costs Facebook virtually zero. And so the beauty of technology is that it's changed the incremental price down to near zero. Just imagine we can do the same for education. The incremental cost of educating somebody, purely online that is, could get to near zero, which means that we really have an opportunity here to educate everybody in the world. And at edX, our mantra is that we want to educate 1 billion people around the world. So I think that is a biggest opportunity where everybody could be educated. I think the second big opportunity is to improve the quality of education on campuses. Campuses haven't changed in 500 years. You have a professor teaching, students sitting in neat little rows in front like corn stalks. It's the same old, things haven't changed. If someone went to sleep 100 years ago and woke up today in a classroom, they think, let's say for 5 minutes, nothing's changed. It's the same old thing, the same old blackboards, nothing's changed. So I think the real opportunity for us in classrooms to change how we do things, to bring in the blended form of learning, bring in digital learning, and improve the quality of learning. So really, we have two major opportunities.
And going back to my original straw poll, do you think learning should be blended? It should never be entirely online.
As a technologist, it's very dangerous to ask me, to tell me, something cannot be done. Because for everything that you tell me cannot be done online, that's a challenge, and we'll go do it. So when we began edX, they said, oh, you cannot grade essays. And last year, our engineers created a way to grade essays online using AI technology, where the professor would grade the first 100 essays against a rubric, and that would train a machine learning model, which would then grade the next 1 million essays or whatever, very, very quickly. So we are discovering new technologies. The people said, oh, you'll never be able to get the small group discussion feel of a liberal arts school. Well, we did. We invented cohorts. Cohorts is a way to take a big discussion group and break it up into small groups. And through a partnership with Google, Google integrated instant hangouts into edX so that students can have virtual groupings. So never say never. So I think from a technology standpoint, do I believe that we could teach online as well as we teach in person today? I believe so. Answer is yes.
So,
However, can the blended be better? Of course. If you take the best of online and the best of in person, of course the blended is going to be better than purely online by definition. Because if purely online is fantastic, the blended will at least be as good as purely online. So of course the blended is going to be equal or slightly better than online. And so the blended model is a very convenient way of saying that purely online won't displace campus education. And so I think, at least for the short term, for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I think blended will be the path, and then we'll see where we go.
so how do you address perception? There was a poll done yesterday in the plenary, and go ahead, you got a question on that? Please.
Maybe we should get a mic.
Excuse me. Thank you for letting me interrupt. I wasn't intending to interrupt, but I did. Sterrett Kaufman, and I work in an edX school, a local school in Elaine. And I just wondered, would your answer be the same in reference to young children? Because I am a principal of a kindergarten school. So I wondered how you would answer that in reference to young children.
So I think with if it's very, very young children, and I think the same is true for college age as well. There's a component of campus education where people get together in groups and learn how to work with each other, work together, learn rhetoric and things like that. That is best done in person. It's hard to imagine online replacing that. And I think the younger the children get, when they're 3 or 4 years old, it's hard to imagine that a significant part of the learning can be online. I think a significant part of it is simply, a large part of learning is how do you interact with other children. And so I think that is clearly has to be in person. And in fact, a teacher mentioned this to me yesterday, that in the very early years, a large part of the learning is actually how to behave in a classroom. So in some sense, we are teaching kids how to behave in a classroom using our existing classroom model. However, if the model changes to how do you learn for what works online, and then how do you behave in a classroom for what works in a classroom, I think we may see some nice little mixture there.
So the straw poll I did earlier, I asked about how many people thought learning could be exclusively online. Only one person put up their hand, halfway up, and a question was asked in the Transformation Challenge to the audience of how many people thought students need more time with teachers, and it was 83% positive. So from a perception standpoint, how do we get from a Harvard X certificate being equivalent to a Harvard degree? How do we get online being held up to be the same as in classroom?
So I think we're really conflating two factors. One is learning material, learning circuits and electronics. That's one piece. But the second piece of education is how do you interact with people, and how do you do certain things that you can't do online. And that is, so education has these two components. So I wrote a blog post in the Huffington Post called Unbundled, where we need to think about unbundling our education, where certain things can be done perfectly well online. In fact, if you want to learn circuits in electronics, so learn how to program, that can be done perfectly well online. You don't need any in-person help. However, the in-person component is one where you learn how to interact with each other and so on. So one can imagine unbundling education where some pieces can be done completely online, and we're already there for many, many subjects. However, there are pieces that you need in-person help. So it's possible that in the future, our university systems will look like, I like to call them digital dormitories, where students come into digital dormitories, where the focus is on the interaction and so on and so forth, and then they spend a lot of their time learning things that they can learn online, and they actually don't go to classrooms in this digital dormitory. So one can imagine utopian styles of learning 20, 30, 40 years from now, where things will look very different from the way they look today.
Thanks. I have two more questions, and I really want to make sure everyone else gets a chance. Is there a danger that MOOCs, particularly edX and Coursera, are exporting US higher education? Because we talk a lot, I mean, a lot of US institutions are part of the consortium. The only other K-12 courses that will be on edX are AP, advanced placement. So it's very US-centric. And is there a danger that actually, as this phenomena picks off, it's actually just exporting quite a specific education system?
So first of all, to be very clear, edX has about 50 partners offering content on edX right now. The GEMS Foundation is our latest partner. GEMS came on board yesterday, and I don't think GEMS is the US, is it?
That's why we came on, to disrupt.
So there you go. So we have partners from a large number of countries. We have IIT Bombay from India. We're working with Queen Rania and the edRAC system. We're working with Tsinghua from China, working with Seoul National University from Korea. So we are working with universities all over the world. And so it's hardly exporting US education. But that said, a large number of students do come to the US to get educated in the US. And certainly the US is very interested in making available this education all over the world. Certainly the State Department thinks that giving education away is probably the best foreign policy tool that the US can give out. The thinking there is that if you're helping people, if you're helping get people out of poverty, they're unlikely to come and shoot you. That they're going to feel friendly towards you, and it's a good thing.
So my last question is, online education can support a fundamental human right. But 5 billion people of this world don't have high-speed internet access. So what's the danger of increasing the digital divide rather than this is actually a tool to decrease it?
I think the number of people that face the digital divide is significantly smaller than the number of people that face the education divide. And so I don't like it when people say, oh, you know what? You are promoting the digital divide, so do not do the education thing. No. If we can educate 1 billion people off the 7 billion, that's a huge first step. And by the time we educate 1 billion people, it'll be 10 years, and the digital divide won't have 5 billion people without cell phones. It will be merely 3. And so I think the digital divide gap is narrowing rapidly. I heard this statistic in Africa. The statistic I heard from a specialist there was that 80% of the children have access to a phone, but only 20% have access to a bricks and mortar school. And so we heard the story in our panel today of one of our panelists, Abigail, who had to walk 7 kilometers to go to a school. I bet she carried a cell phone in her pocket while she walked 7 kilometers to school. So let's at least work on those who have some devices and help them. And by the time we get done with them, there'll be a lot more people that have cell phones and internet connectivity.
That's great. Does anyone want to jump in? Yeah, please. Tarek.
Hi, I'm Tarek from Google. It's good to hear the reference to Google and how we're supporting you. You mentioned a utopian future in terms of online education. So could you give us a glimpse into some of the technologies that we may see, 5, 10 years down the line, like augmented reality, virtual reality, and so forth?
I think the best way to think of what education might look like 10 years from now is just look at what kids are doing today. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not saying I'm not judging it. But how do kids interact today? They rarely call each other on the phone. They rarely go and meet each other. They are on video chat, they're on WhatsApp, they're on Snapchat, they're on Vine. doing all of these things completely online. They're playing video games, they're playing, reality games, they're watching TV shows, the whole thing is completely virtual. So 10 years from now, I think education is going to look like that. They're going to have, instead of physical laboratories, they will have game-like experience in virtual labs. Instead of having physical group discussions, they will be having virtual group discussions. And in fact, people say, oh, but that will hurt collaboration. No. I remember when I had to collaborate with a friend, and it's raining intensely outside in Mangalore. It rained 6 months of the year. I could not walk I had to walk a mile to a friend's house to collaborate. But now here, in an instant, 4 people can get on WhatsApp or one of the instant chat sessions or Google Hangout and start collaborating. So I think it may get easier. So just look at how children are playing video games and how they interact with media today. That's how learning will be 10 years from now.
Anyone else? Yep.
Hello, I'm Joe Haldutton from the RSA. I'm a big fan of what you're doing. I think it has huge potential, particularly in terms of teacher training and professional development. But given you're a startup, I want to ask you a little bit about failure. Is there a particular course that edX has been part of, that a MOOC or something like it, that seems to have been much less effective or much less successful, and what can we learn from that experience?
So the question is that, we hear about all the successes, particularly in courses. What has been a course that hasn't been all that successful? So I think right now, given where technology is, I think courses that involve a huge laboratory component, for example, chemistry laboratories, or in biology, let's say you have to dissect a frog, for example. We can't quite do all of that yet. In many labs, on edX in particular, we do have online simulation-based technologies, but we're not completely there yet. And another part that we're not able to do well is where the instructor needs to have small group discussions with 2 or 3 students, where the students need to get help from the instructor. And even when instructors go online and have office hours online, it still is not the same as people going and meeting the instructor. So in some humanities subjects where there's a lot of debate to be had, where people want to discuss and debate, we just haven't been able to really nail the online discussion forum. And the problem is that when you have 100,000 students discussing things, it's very, very hard to latch on to a thread and have 3 or 4 people discuss something intensely. That really we haven't nailed that yet. So those courses that need such a discussion don't do so well.
I'm Don Guttenplan from the International New York Times. And my question is, edX is not for profit. So how do you see yourself fitting into the landscape with Coursera, Udacity, and the for-profit or the potentially for-profit MOOC? Do you see, and maybe you could say a little bit about why you are not for profit. Thank you.
So you asked the question, edX, you're not for profit. How do you see yourself fitting with the for-profits? I think I should, just like the flipped classroom, I should flip the question here, which is that I think the question to ask you is that, or the for-profits, is how do for-profits see them fitting in with an education mission? How many of you here, if you look at education, higher ed, okay, let's look at universities. How many of you here went to a non-profit university? Or a university whether funded by the government or a non-profit? It could be private. MIT is private, but a non-profit. How many of you went to a for-profit higher education university? There's 1 or 2. So most of our universities are non-profit. And if you look at education being a basic human right, one could argue that when something is an absolute fundamental basic human right, and if MOOC technology can truly disrupt it, then in my mind, it's much better that it be done by a non-profit. So that if you're changing the world, you can do it in a very principled manner. So with edX, when we started it, right from day one, we felt this has to be a non-profit. So we can be guided by principle, not profit. And I'll give you at least a couple of examples where our decisions would have been different had we been a for-profit. One of them was As a basic human right, you want to give away education to everybody. So as a nonprofit, we said, look, if we try to make a platform proprietary, then only we can use our platform. And so we made a platform available as open source, which means anybody can take a platform and run it. And we found adoptions by countries, China, France, the Queen Rani from the Middle East, Taiwan, Japan, and more countries are adopting the open source platform. And that's been great as education has been spreading online through our platform. But we don't make a penny out of it. In fact, it hurts us because they come to us for support, and we have to use precious resources to help them. None of the for-profits have gone open source. They're all closed source. So right there is a decision. If you really believe education is a fundamental human right, then give things away. But the for-profits made the decision not to give it away. So that's one decision that you can see right away. I'll give you another example. With edX, we can take a long-term view. It's a non-profit. We just have to sustain ourselves. And so no matter how the going is, no matter how tough the going is, how long it takes us to be profitable or to be self-sustaining, we will keep at it because this is so important. With the for-profit, we already saw one of the for-profits pivoted. They started with the mission of giving away free education to the world, but the financial pressures forced them to pivot, and now they're going to focus on revenue-bearing professional education. And so with edX, we'll do some of these other things to be self-sustaining, but our basic mission is going to be true. We're going to be true to our mission no matter how long it takes. We're not going to allow VCs and others to pivot us for the profit motive.
Hi, Amy Rosen. I run an NGO called NIFTY, the Network, here I am, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, and also a big fan of your work. One comment and one question. Comment is to the earlier discussion about how you create relative value to the actual education at Harvard and MIT and there. I always laugh because never in that debate is I'm on the faculty of Columbia Business School. I've had children at MIT and Harvard. Nobody ever mentions how much of those kids are now watching their classes online for their undergraduate degrees anyhow. Question is, what's your reaction to the low completion rates on, the MOOCs like Coursera, et cetera?
So the question is, what's your reaction to the low completion rates of MOOCs? So with MOOCs, usually about 5 to 7% of the learners pass the course and earn a certificate. So let me take a quick little poll. How many people here watch YouTube videos? How many people have watched a YouTube video? Everybody. How many of you have watched a YouTube video how many of you watch YouTube videos to the very end? I would say it's about 5%. So you get my drift? So with online courses, these are free. A lot of people just checking it out. They're not in there to get a degree program and so on. And so there's no admissions. So MIT has admissions. At MIT, for example, MIT admits about 7% of the students that apply. And for the MOOC courses from MIT, about 7% of the students pass the MOOCs. And when there's no admissions test, anybody can take it. It completely democratizes education. It increases access. So why are we surprised when 7% pass it? Many of them don't even care to pass it, and it's hard stuff. So I'm not so concerned about MOOC completion rates, just as Google is not concerned about people watching every single YouTube video to the very end. Different people get different things out of it, but YouTube is very useful as a service.
Hi, I'm Lalita. I'm a GEMS principal. We have introduced a number of Coursera courses for our children, and it's been quite successful in the school. My question to you is, recently I moduled one of my training courses for teachers in the similar format. And about 80 of my teachers are currently enrolled in the course. And the responses that I get from 80 teachers, they're brilliant responses, but how do I maintain quality? So my question to you is, you are enrolling students from all over the world, and you get responses from so many students. How do you maintain the quality? Is the same quality as a face-to-face session?
The quality of the teaching or quality of the
The
student?
quality of responses. Students are responding to the course. It's more of independent learning and how you want to take it forward. So students are responding. But your trainers, would they have time to read all the responses? How do you respond to them? Because on a face-to-face, it's very easy to respond, and but on an online course, when you have thousands and thousands of students, how do you manage? I couldn't manage with my 80 responses.
Right, so clearly with online learning, you cannot do things manually. So for the course that my colleagues and I taught on edX, we had 155,000 students take the course. So everything has to be completely automated. It has to be virtual. The labs have to be virtually graded. Everything, even essays have to be virtually graded. Nothing can be done manually. And so there are no manual responses. And so we have to develop technologies to make sure that the quality of responses is very good. And the quality has two aspects to it. One aspect of quality is how quick do you get the response? Instant feedback. Because if I submit a problem, to me as a student, I love it when I get an instant feedback. If I have to wait 1 month for the feedback, I kind of lose interest, forget about it, and go on to something else. With online learning, you get instant feedback. That's a huge positive. The quality, it's certainly better that when an instructor provides careful feedback on an essay, that's going to be better quality than a computer providing the feedback by a huge margin. However, the real challenge is that once an instructor has to grade more than 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 essays, they begin to have TAs begin to do the grading. And once you get more and more people help you with the grading, I've never seen a student that has been happy with the essay grading done by somebody else. Now, all machines have to do is not do much worse than that. So as an example, Professor Bonovec on edX taught a course on globalization, and he's in the philosophy department. And he used the AI grader, and his assessment was that he had 2 TAs grading it from the philosophy department, 2 of his best TAs, and he found that the AI grader, the grades assigned by the AI grading technology, by and large came between the grades assigned by his 2 TAs. So the key for us is that we improve the quality of the automatic graders, and the feedback is instant. So instant feedback really, really makes a big difference to students.
We were talking about digital learning and technology and all. So in rural countries, in rural places where even basic electricity is not there, we need internet, we need electricity, isn't it? So in those places, how are we going to reach online learning there? Because even though there's no electricity, traditional learning will still take place with teachers. Yeah. So how is edX going to help us with that? Yeah.
So my argument for that is the same as my argument for the digital divide. What you're saying is we have a digital divide, and what you're saying is we also have a power divide. Some people have power, some people don't. And I say that, let's at least take the first step. Let's at least teach people that can access the internet, that have power. And so we will get to the people that will eventually have power, and so on. In fact, when kids don't have power, it's very difficult for them to learn anyway. So how do you, if you come home, how do you learn if you don't have power, even in a normal classroom? And so that is challenging to begin with. So I'm a big believer in that. We don't let these challenges stop us from at least doing what we can for those that can get access to the internet and so on.
Another one question. Since digital learning is just coming up, we can go for complete online learning for subjects like MBA and all those stuffs. But what about science-related subjects where practical part is more important than just the reading and the technical stuff? So, for example, say a doctor. You can't expect a doctor operating you by just doing online learning, isn't it? So how are you going to challenge that?
So the question has to do with science and STEM courses. What do you do with the practicum part, with the laboratories? So there again, what we do. Let me take a poll again. So how many people flew into Dubai? How many people took an airline into Dubai? Okay, so about half of you flew into Dubai. Now, did you all realize that in today with pilot training, pilots spend 95% of their time with a flight simulator. So most of flying is learned on a simulator. They only spend about 5-10% of the time flying a real airplane. But we all felt comfortable taking a plane and flying over. So similarly with science and so on, even with medicine, you won't believe the number of universities where it's hard to find a cadaver to do dissection and so on. So they actually use dummy dolls and so on. In fact, they're moving to a virtual dissection. And so, in fact, it can be much better than the whole experience can be better in many ways than having to smell the formalin, and which is terrible for those of you who've been near formalin. And when you operate a real patient, there is no formalin. So it's not like you are being trained in to do the real thing. So what we do online is we use simulation technology. And it's amazing. I mean, we can pretty much simulate anything. There are not too many things that you can't simulate given enough advancement in technology. So we are doing chemistry labs, we're doing physics labs, mathematics labs, biology labs, circuits labs in a variety of areas. And the list of labs we're able to do online keeps increasing. And for the students, it's cheap. In a lot of schools, particularly in poor districts, in districts where they may not have a lot of power supplies and so on, they don't have a lot of equipment. But with online, it's cheap to do these labs. And so more students can get access to the online labs than ever before. Now, before they get a real job, it is useful that it is helpful for them to go and do at least some practicum with real equipment. But that can be for a very small amount of time.
Hi, my name is Neha. I recently graduated from Stanford University, and I'm currently working on a K-12 model for education. So my question pertains to blended learnings and blended classrooms in secondary and elementary schools. And I ask this question because I know it's more challenging to motivate younger kids to do their homework or to watch lectures at home. Do you think that it could have a reverse effect where the actual concentrated learning aspect is compromised on, and when students come to classrooms, they haven't really, learned anything and they're just there? So do you think that blended classroom is a good model for secondary and elementary schools?
So I think that if I understood the question, I think the issue there is that how do you engage the student at home and in the classroom? And what we found is that the instant feedback that you get from doing things online is very addicting. And so on edX, you get a red check mark when you take edX course, and I encourage you to go try it out. We have a demo course on edX that you can try out in 5 or 10 minutes. And when you answer a question, you get it wrong, you get a red cross, and you get something right, you get a green check mark. And students are telling us that they go to bed at night dreaming of the green check marks because it brings the element of gaming into it. They can keep trying things till they get something right. It's a very game-like experience. So my sense is that students will spend more time doing homeworks because they get instant feedback. It's really painful to do homeworks when you write it on paper, and then you go and submit it, and you have no idea whether you got something right or wrong. But if you do it online, you get instant feedback. So I think when kids go to class, having done homeworks and having gotten instant feedback, I think they go to class much more prepared. And if they're much more prepared, they can be much more engaged students. So I'm not sure if I answered your question completely, but...
Hi, my question is somewhat similar to the previous question. The thing is, I like the idea of e-learning when it talk about higher education. To be honest, I feel like I can learn just as much thing at home as I go to class. But when talking about primary education there is not just academic, it's more like life learning skills as well. When you talk about confidence, public speaking, don't you think in those cases using e-learning in a way will hinder and allow those kids to fall through the cracks and the teachers to not realize as to special needs that some student might have, and won't that cause a much bigger problem in future?
So I agree with the general point, but not with the specific examples you mentioned, actually. So first of all, at the primary level, then K through 12 level, or even at the college level, I think there are a lot of skills that cannot be taught online, or at least I don't know how to teach them. Again, as an engineer, you never tell an engineer you cannot do something, because then I'll go work hard at it and I'll do it in 5 years. So, but at least at this instant of time, I think it's going to be hard to teach someone how to collaborate with somebody else, although I guess you can do it online. But there are, how do you teach people rhetoric? How do you teach people to engage and have a conversation with each other? How do you teach someone to converse with another person live, online? It's much better to have them do it live. So there are a number of life skills that you want to teach live, clearly. But the example you use, public speaking, for instance, we have courses on edX on public speaking. University of Washington has a public speaking course on edX, which is widely popular. And you can provide feedback for public speaking courses. We have a number of writing courses on which are also very popular. So writing and speaking, I think you can do online. And in fact, for writing, you can provide very quick feedback, and you can enable students to rewrite and revise their writing much more quickly than if they had to submit the essay and wait 2 weeks to get the graded essay back. But I agree with your larger point, which is that there are certainly many skills that you cannot teach completely online.
So I'm afraid we've almost run out of time, so I get the privilege of asking one last question. You know, we've talked about huge opportunity, reaching 1 billion people. So what keeps you up at night? What's the impediment? Where could it all go wrong?
Oh, the list is too long to. The list is too long in terms of what could go wrong. Things go wrong all the time, just that you don't know it. So I think the biggest, I would say the biggest challenge for us is how do you get instructors and professors? How do we scale to a number of instructors and professors? So far, we have the bleeding edge instructors adopting it. They're taking risks. They're working really hard, creating online courses. One of the biggest challenges is going to be, at the end of the day, unless the instructors and universities adopt it and also bring it onto campus, this is not going to, nothing's going to happen. And so you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so the question is, how do we get those successes? How do we articulate those successes and talk to professors and universities that, look, this is not going to hurt you. We will all get to a better place by doing it. Try it out. And so I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges, which is getting people to try it out, getting people to adopt it. And so, so far we're seeing the bleeding edge do it. And I think until we can cross the chasm and go from the bleeding edge to a larger population, this won't really catch on in a big way.
That's great. So Anne McElvoy referred to you as the MOOC father. So thank you to Anant. If you could all just give him a round of applause. So great for him to spare his time. Thank you.
Thank you all.